before we get started. And this is kind of a silly question. It's about who has a cell phone in here? Yes, everybody has a cell phone, right? I guess the question is, who doesn't have a cell phone nowadays, right? You know, it's kind of, so now we have, everyone has apps, and everyone has, information that, they're using. They're using video, they're using Instagram and pictures, and so many cool things you've got going on with phones now, right? And so, even I bet a lot of you kind of, before you even pull out your computer, you probably look at your cell phone, check email, especially if it's late at night. You don't need to go sit at your desktop or even pull out that laptop. But here's the thing, it's kind of funny because 15 years ago, it was a lot different with cell phones. I remember my parents had, I think, cell phone that was in a bag. You remember that? It was like they had a shoulder strap in the bag. It's like, wow, I now that I think about it. But the thing that we were most concerned about at that time was just making a call. No text messaging, it was nothing. It was just pick it up and dial. It was just like your home phone. Pick up, dial the number, and that's it. So now we got text messages. My kids, for instance, I've got 3 girls, preteens. And so they will send me these long text messages. I'm like, can you just call me? To read all of this, you could probably just call me. But I say all that to say is that it's pretty unique in the sense that there's one thing, a unique feature about a cell phone that we probably just overlook. And that's data that's associated with data, right? How many of you have, may have got a call on your cell phone and you looked at it and you said, I'm not going to answer that, I don't know who that is. Okay? Or you may look through your cell phone and you say, I don't remember whose number this is. So I say that to say is that we have data in a cell phone, and that data is associated with other data. With content. On a high level, we've got metadata associated on the cell phone, right? You're kind of associating data you're wanting to share. So you're sharing contact, you're sharing information about that contact in your phone. So you're sharing a lot in that cell phone. So just thought I would start out with that, just to say, wow, there's a lot of things in our lives that we're really using as far as data in our lives to share amongst other data. It kind of points out. So just to welcome here, I'm Therelee Washington. I started Agility Solutions Group, a small consulting company out of Dallas, and started it in 2008. So moving right along, our session agenda, I'm going to try to wrap up everything into one, not spending specifically some time on each topic. I'm going to try to tie it all together with a demo to kind of look at our agenda today. So we're going to start with the management of data and understanding management of data in SharePoint 2010 and its impact on taxonomy, navigation, and search. It's one area that we're going to cover. We're going to then look at content types and examine the reusable collection of settings that we can use in content types and how that all relates into using management of data service in SharePoint 2010. We'll look at some security trimming and how we understand how security trimming works. We'll look at the simple act of just filtering out information that should not be seen or viewed by someone else. We'll look at a very light way of doing some security trimming, and then we'll look at search and how to enhance that end-user experience by mapping all properties to manage properties and how they can refer, it can be shown in a defined search and help users perform more successful queries. So that's going to be the agenda. And so when I thought about when the point is to share the overview, and I thought, ideally a business that has, probably some constraints related to access and visibility to information, and that supports its operation. It's kind of hard to manage, that organization, right? But when you think about the point, it's like, wow, there's a lot of information that I need. There's a lot of information I need access. Where is that information? I think about how SharePoint kind of started. It was kind of, from an ability to kind of move from that file share and kind of use it as a repository to find information. So as I was thinking, I said, well, ideally, wow, that's the point. And to share is that, is that who, what, when, and where. those are core considerations when addressing the need for business information that support operations and provides organization an opportunity to effectively manage information process, accessibility, and visibility. So here we are again, and I believe that's what really SharePoint is. It's really the point to really share. When you look at the basis to what SharePoint really does. It gives you the ability to share, collaborate, content management, but ideally I believe that it's really designed to be able to collaborate amongst individuals and organizations and be able to share content across the organization. So we're looking at understanding managed metadata in SharePoint 2010 and its impact on taxonomy, navigation, and search. So one of the most compelling things about SharePoint 2010 is its managed metadata service, and I'll call it MMS for short. Simply put, metadata is data that describes other data. Okay? So a good way to conceptualize metadata may be to think about a photograph that you've taken, and to think about, when that photograph was taken, who's in the photograph. These are my girls here. These are the 3 girls that like to send text messages. My twins, me and Mike on the end, they're 12 years old, and I have a 15-year-old. My twin's almost as tall as she is, my 15-year-old, but she's 15 now. But let's give you an idea of what to think about when you think about metadata and how it describes information about that photograph. So I'm going to focus on how the managed metadata service can help you manage metadata and how, if leveraged properly, can significantly improve that overall quality of search in your organizations. So why do I need metadata? Why can't I just search like I do Google? Here's one thing I've been asked when I've done projects, and I work with organizations and they say, wow, I hate SharePoint because I can't find anything. Oh, really? Because ideally, Microsoft sells it as to a strong search, the search engine, very strong, right? But I still find organizations and individuals that I work with that say, I don't like SharePoint because I can't find anything. So from a user's perspective, when you look at the Google experience, they ask me, why can't I have that Google type experience in SharePoint? It's like, good question. So, because all they want to do in Google is put in a couple of keywords, and wow, here it is. That's the experience I'm looking for. But what they're not saying is what's happening in the back end. Before the query is ever run, the query is boosted by that metadata that's associated with that search query. So when you can deliver Google-like searches to your users, provided you have the same advantages that Google has. They have unfederated access to data repositories. They have content producers painstakingly tagging context of it's ranked high on some of these search engines, Google and Bing. And content consumers unknowingly identifying and tagging the most useful content, as well as Google doing some pretty cool stuff on the back end. But it's not top secret, pretty much we understand what that is. So what does this have to do with metadata? So human beings are much better at classifying data at this point than machines are. So we understand how to tag certain information pertaining to a piece of data. We can do that better than a machine can. We can understand if we take a photo and we upload a photo to SharePoint, we're much better at saying who's in that photo than SharePoint. SharePoint is not going to be able to say who's in that photo. SharePoint's not going to be able to say who's in it, where it was taken, and what time it was taken. So we're much better at classifying that than machines are. On the web, administrators go to great lengths to make sure that content can be indexed and ranked favorably. So the point here is that most users would never go to that extent to try to tag that information. They want to see immediate results, right? They're too busy to go through entering in, tagging that data. The search engine just simply does a brute force match of keywords, and then you end up scrolling through information. So what happens in the SharePoint is that if we don't utilize the metadata associated to data, then we don't have what we need in those search results queries, right? We just get a list of things and we're still scrolling through information to try to find in our search within SharePoint. So how can SharePoint Managed Metadata Service help? Well, Managed Metadata Service is a service provided by SharePoint 2010 that does 3 things. It does 3 things pretty well. It provides a central repository for managing an organization's taxonomy. It provides a central repository for managing an organization's taxonomy. And it provides the ability to syndicate content types. So before we get into that, let's look at some terminology just to go over. So we're looking at the 3 things, important things here, that the Managed Metadata Service does is provides a central repository for taxonomy and taxonomy. It provides the ability to syndicate content types. So what we'll do here is we'll look at some terminology before digging into it. So when we think about taxonomy, taxonomy is really a collection of related word phrases that are typically arranged in a hierarchy structure. The image to the right here shows the taxonomy term store. We're going to get into this into the demo, and I'm going to show you how the taxonomy term store and how we're using this structure in taxonomy to define certain layers of the term store in the management data service. So Microsoft uses the term set in place of taxonomy. They use the word term to describe the word phrase that constitute the taxonomy. And they use phrase term store to describe where term sets are maintained and managed. So the term store represents an occurrence of management of data service. We're going to get into that because I know that was a lot. So ideally, the term store, once you create that management of data service, it creates the term store. So we'll get into that more deeply into the demo. But when you create an instance of a management of data service, it's actually a taxonomy term store that is created. And we'll look at that closely going into the demo. So if you think about it, I just wanted to kind of show you that breakout here of the term store, which is the management of data service, the level, the top level, that's the service application. The term group, term sets, term 1 and term 1A, and it kind of branches off to synonyms accordingly. And additionally, please note in hardware that I think that you can associate synonyms with terms, which are essentially for a good search experience. So you can kind of continue to see the hierarchy structure here, and you can continue to move this out accordingly when you define what your terms are within your taxonomy term store of your management of data service. So let's look at folksonomy. Folksonomy is the internet has shown us that social networking is a powerful means of capturing and sharing knowledge, right? I mean, one aspect of social networking is using is tagging. That whole thing about tagging, right? And that's using our social means to, but ideally, as I move along, Microsoft has created a new term here, which is constituted folksonomy is called enterprise keywords. So let's think about it. Enterprise keywords are very, very important when you talk about management of data service, because that's ideally how we're going to associate metadata to a content source or data. So we've got, so Microsoft has called that enterprise keywords, and it constitutes folksonomy. So like taxonomy, these are centrally stored in a term store as users apply them. So we can tag that data and also associate enterprise keywords to that data as well. So here's the big thing about content types. Now I'll tell you three things. It was taxonomy, folksonomy, and content types. The reason along is because I want to give time for our demo and also for questions and answers. I think that just cover this at a high level, but once we dig down into it, we'll get a chance to really see. The final capability that the management of data service brings to the table is around content types. And now you may ask, what does this have to do with the management of data service? The management of data service enables the creation of the content type hub, which centralizes the management of content types. Site collections, even other SharePoint forms can subscribe to these content types, enabling consistent metadata across an organization. This is key, because what happens here, if you notice in the slide, is that from a web application level, from the root site collection level, we can have content types, and through the management of data service, it can be consumed through other applications. So we have that consistent metadata across all applications or across the form. So now you have the ability now to, when you create the management of data, which they call enterprise keywords, that we're going to include in this content type, we can use this as a defined content type across organizations. So now we have a content type that can be used across the applications within SharePoint. So we'll look closely at that and how content types really work together with the management of data service. So if we look at term sets and taxonomy and term management, there's a couple of things here. This is just a slide to show you, again, within the term store, you have the ability now to copy terms, you can merge terms. There's a lot of functionality, again, that we'll look at within the term store when you're able to create, merge, even copy terms with children. But one of the unique things here is to be able to term store gives you the ability to import taxonomy in a CSV format. So you can easily create this in an Excel file and then import it in. So you can create this hierarchy structure, this taxonomy structure in an Excel worksheet, and then import this in to create this hierarchy structure here. I think that's very neat, and we'll look at that as well moving into the demo. So the next point is the global and local term store. Here's something that's pretty unique, is that you have global and local term store. I'm going to jump to another screen here, which I think it kind of depicts it more better here. And what we have here is the ability to have a global term store that can be consumed across site collections within an application. You can have a local term store that can only be consumed by a particular site collection. This is pretty unique here because you can have defined at the global term store. If you notice here that I have the sales site collection, marketing site collection, product site collection, and legal site collection, all consuming from the global term store that's shared across all site collections. But the local term store, which from the product site, they can create their own products metadata database, and local term store, which defines their local term store within their organization, within their department for their collection. So we have legal site collection as well that you consume. So if you notice with the green has its on local term store for legal, but yet legal can also consume not only from the global term set, but also the local term store, and also its own defined local term store here for legal. So pretty unique here when you talk about global and when you talk about local term stores. You have globally you can consume across all site collections, and local term stores can be consumed it's just for that local site collection. So pretty unique there, because you can define what those terms are, those local terms for that particular site collection in that group. So you have some things that just need to be confined to legal or one department. You're able to define that in its own legal term store, local term store as it's defined in Microsoft as a local and local. So as we're moving right along, using taxonomy metadata to improve search and discovery. So one of the cool things we've all seen is this refinement panel, which gives us the ability to kind of do some refined searches in SharePoint. So 2010 is pretty good at that. But the purpose is to offer searchers the ability to easily refine results set based on metadata properties. So here we are again with this metadata. So you're able to refine searches based on the metadata properties of that search. But one of the unique things here, we'll look at this as well, is the SharePoint's metadata navigation for list and document libraries. The cool thing about when you enable the managed metadata service is that you're able to now define, look at some of the out-of-the-box features to filter in a particular library. So if you notice here, I can filter through the content types, manage keywords. We'll dig into this more. I know this kind of looks Greek to you, but this is one of the examples that I'm going to demonstrate in the demo, is to how the refinement panel can also give you the ability to refine some of those searches, just like your search experience does when you use your defined search, your out-of-the-box search experience. So this gives the user the ability to start at the top of the hierarchy. With each selection, see the child relationship of the parent node that was selected. So it branches off into the parent. From the parent, you can branch out into that hierarchy structure. And so that alternatively, the user can go straight to the child node and filter directly. And in each case, lengthy list can be filtered with a very few pointed clicks. So we can take a lengthy list. Think about this now, that if you have a pretty large collection of document library of content, you can use this refinement panel to kind of sort and kind of filter out based on the metadata that you have associated with it. You may want to see something that's associated from a particular school. We'll go into this because I created a Tulsa school district. You know, I don't know, what did Microsoft call this in Tulsa? But I created that, and we'll take a look at that. Well, you're able to look at data within a repository. You can filter that like you could in the search experience over to. That's a pretty cool feature that we'll look at. So security trimming based on metadata. So here's some steps that, from a high level, and this is what we're going to do in our demonstrations. And this is going to be steps to achieve this using the out-of-the-box content organizer feature. Here's something that we haven't talked about, but we can use this content organizer feature within to do some security, so unique security trimming to route information based on what's chosen, metadata that's chosen for an item. So The first step would be to create a custom content type, which we're going to do. We're going to add the metadata column to that content type. We're going to add this custom content type to a document library. Here's the unique thing. We're going to create target folders in a document library. So here's what our scenario is going to be, where we want to be able to route document based on the metadata to that document to a particular document library that's been security trained. So now that we have the ability in SharePoint, we can secure document libraries down to users. So we can say, if we create multiple document libraries, we can give those document libraries unique permissions. With the content organizer, we can route that document to a particular document, to a particular folder within the document library based on permission. So we're going to use of course, breaking the permissions of the inheritance, and we're going to create a unique way of routing documents around using metadata and the content organizer feature in SharePoint. So, of course, you have to go to site settings and activate the content organizer feature. We'll lift it back and add the content organizer rule to route documents to folders. So, starting from the point, all documents the user uploads to document library will be processed by the content organizer and placed in a secured folder based on the document category, secured based on the metadata. So ideally, again, what we have here is that we have a document library. We've created some folders. Now, I've seen this a lot. I've seen a lot of times that we have document libraries and create folders. But the unique thing is that SharePoint provides that security training where we're able to define what security we have for each folder in that document library. So now what we have is the ability to use managed metadata based on those choices of the keywords to route that document to each particular document library. So it's going to make a lot more sense once we jump into the demo. But a user will be informed by the following message once they're able, this is just a screen, that the content organizer will then route that document to its particular location, and then they will have a save to final location in that document library. So, as we previously covered, the metadata navigation and filtering feature make navigation over categories more convenient. So that brings us to the demo. So here's the fun thing. We're going to go into the demo and talk about how we can focus on the managed metadata term store and navigation, security, and search. Kind of boring. Take off this jacket for a second. Go right into it. So I've got a pretty cool little environment here set up in CloudShare. I'm going to use CloudShare. It works. So like I said, I created this Kentucky District Schools. Pretty cool because I wanted some real data. And here's my scenario, okay? So we have the Kentucky School District. And this Kentucky School District has many schools, right? A couple of different schools. The idea is that we want to use SharePoint to collaborate, but I may want to share resources. I'm an educator, and I may want to share learning information with another school. This really works. This is something that I'm just going to drop off. So what I did here is I created what's called a teacher's resource area. Within this teacher's resource area, which is just plainly just a site here under our application of a Kentucky School District. And what we have here is what I'm calling the drop-off center. And what this does is that it creates the ability for a teacher to say, hey, I've got some great resources here that I want to give to, how to write in Old English. And I think that that would be great for, to go over to, let's see, we'll call this how to write Old English resource, okay, for kids. So here's my enterprise keywords. So what we want to do here is we want to say, based on the keywords, I'm going to say, well, the enterprise keywords this should really belong to John Tyler High School. I can even dig down a little deeper, and I can say, it belongs to within the curriculum, John Tyler, and it should probably go over to English. So I can continue to use this enterprise keywords, and what's going to happen here is that it's going to tell me the location based on the keywords that I put into the metadata. So what's happening here is that I'm using the content organizer. I have rules. I'm using it on a content type, using the enterprise keywords column. Based on the keywords, that metadata, the content organizer understands, now I understand where this document needs to belong, since it needs to go over to the school resources, and it needs to be defined over to the John Tyler High School document library. And here it is, how to write in Old English. So what happened here is that I was able to, as a teacher, I was able to drop off some information that I think could be fairly useful to a school that could help them in their education. So what this is, instead of creating, a workflow, right? You can just create this content organizer rule. And if you don't have permission, so if say for instance that we have a teacher that belongs to another school, this teacher goes here, we know the security trail, and we go to school resources, and really all they see here is just the document, the folder that they, so we can do groups here, right? We could say, really define this by groups, but I'm logged in now with my name, and of course I have, but you kind of get the idea about, we all kind of understand how security determinant works, and we can define this based on groups and associated group to that folder. But this is how we use the managed metadata and the content organizer to kind of drive content. And so we'll look closely at how this was done. So if we look at how, there's a couple of things when we look at how we create this managed metadata service. In Central Administration 2010, there's the application management, and we look at the managed service application. Here, we're going to create a new managed metadata service. And we're going to use an Excel file that I've created in order to create that taxonomy structure that was there. We can do this manually, but if we can create this CSV file to create that type of structure within our managed metadata service. So if we go here and we say, let's create a new managed metadata service application. First thing that comes with it asks for a name. We're going to call this SharePoint. Our database server, it asks for a database name. We want to give this, we'll just give it SharePoint Fast as a name there. Used for the database authentication. Of course, you can use the Windows authentication, which is recommended, or you can use the SQL authentication. Pretty standard in SharePoint. You have that option there when you're trying to get access to that database. Also has the ability to configure a developer server, database server. We're going to use an existing application pool. We're going to use the SharePoint Web Service System application pool. And we've already have a registered managed account, service account that I have here. And I'm using the former account. But of course, we understand it's probably another breakout session about service accounts. But for the sake of this presentation, we're going to use the SharePoint former account that I have defined here. And we're going to point to the content type hub of the teacher's resources site here. So we're going to copy this and put it here as the content type hub. So and we're going to click OK. So now we're creating that new managed metadata service application. Not sure why it takes a few minutes, but it's churning. I've done this a couple of times. I clicked it. It's like, what's going on? I'm clicking and nothing's happening. It's happening. It should pop right here in a second. I want to make sure that I have enough time that we have some time here for questions. Okay, great. So we've got the managed metadata service created, which I called here SharePoint Fast DC. There's some associations once I get this configured, and I like to look at the managed metadata service connections. We're going to properties here, and I like to make sure that I have the service application's default service location for keywords. I want to make sure that the service application's default storage location for columns. So this is basically telling me that I have one because another service application in the form is already configured to be the default, because I've created one for the consultant. So And so once we have that configured and we look at the service connections, we go into the configuration of the actual the taxonomy term store. So here's where all of the fun starts. And this is where we're able to create this structure. And the good thing here is that it has a simple import file here that we can use as a CSV. So once you create it, you can use this sample import file to create your taxonomy structure here. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say, I'm going to create a new group, and we're going to call it SharePoint Fest. I'm going to say SharePoint Fest terms. SharePoint Fest terms. Okay. And so from that level here, we're able to import term set. To import term set, we can locate that CSV file. Let me just do this for a second. Let me let you see what that looks like. That US sample import document looks like, and what it all kind of needs to. It's kind of all scrambled, but you have the term set name here. You have the term set description. You have this LCID, and this is basically a unique identifier that kind of tells what language you're going to use. Look at what that LCID is, because I didn't know what that was. I had to really look that up. So, is it available for tagging? And it's true. You get into the term description after we get into is it available for tagging. So it kind of goes down into term description. Then it goes into level 1, level 2, level 3. So I've created one based on what they provided here as a template here for us to use to create the SharePoint Fest structure for taxonomy. So got that created, and I'm going to say okay. And what's going to happen here is this is going to turn out and create that structure that we're looking for. So we've got SharePoint terms, right? And what that did was, based on the SharePoint I have, MOS, SharePoint 2010, SharePoint 2013. And under each edition here, I have additional breakdown. And I'll show you here that actual breakout of that Excel file that I've worked with. We can take a pause while it's kind of great. Question.
In the demo before you started importing terms, you added to the taxonomy to document uploading. When we saw the third one location,
Right.
What happened with the second term? That's up for a secondary location, was people hobbies?
So I think the first thing we put the school, then you had curriculum, and then you had, so in that term store, I didn't dig down into much more other than the term, the way it was structured. I could have went deeper in that to create from curriculum then into English, but I would have been digging down even more, but I could have, so that's a good question. I could have continued to move depending on metadata that I wanted to associate with that. I could have continued to move along with John Tyler High School curriculum, English, and just scale down and let that be. And we can also, so when you have that metadata, you can also say, based on the metadata, we can say, you can add some security trimming to that to say, maybe we want to have only this go to English, this curriculum to go to English teachers, or be notified and set an alert that there's some new content there. So, yes, we can answer your question. Yes, sir.
So, when you name, let's see if I can see here. So, when you gave the folder, we call it folder library, the name of the St. John
The school, right?
The name of the school. You also, even though that was the name of the school, that was the name of the library, you also made the name of the content, right?
Right. So, yes, you can.
And then once you made the name of the content type, you associated term set and term store for that content type.
Let's back up a little bit. So the content type, and that's what I was going to get into, is when we created the content type, we're going to use, it's a column called enterprise keywords. And that column and that content type is called enterprise keywords. And this is what's pulling from the managed metadata term store. And that's where we're getting the keywords. So when we create that content type, but we want to use a column, and we're going to use the enterprise keyword column. because that enterprise keyword will allow us to search. That's what's going to allow us to really search against the metadata. That's a part of the managed metadata service of the term store. So it's the enterprise keywords. And that's how, when we looked at it, we talked about taxonomy, we talked about tagging. We have to have a column there on the content type that will allow us to kind of tag based on metadata that we want to associate to an item. So it goes from, you want to create a content type, you want to enable, and then you want to use the enterprise keywords column, which will pull from the managed metadata term store, in which when you search, you're able to see those defined taxonomy terms within your taxonomy store that's going to pull up in your enterprise keywords. Does that make sense? Okay. I'm going to, hopefully, I'm just kind of giving it some time. Hopefully, after you go in, I want to show you that again. One more question in the back.
I was wondering if you can use enterprise keywords with info path forms.
Enterprise keywords and info path forms.
Right. So if you have content type and you want to modify the form for content type,
absolutely, absolutely you can, absolutely. Because ideally, with info path, you can pull in, different, columns in SharePoint. So you actually can use that. You can modify that form. Because ideally, when you think about info path, you're just really enhancing that form experience for, that content type of that form experience, right? So you really can. You can pull that in as well. So because you're just associating that to list, that library, that content type, so you're able to now create a nice info path form and use that in your info path as well, using some connectivity. That's a good question. That's something that I would probably want to implement into it.
But you're unable to use managed metadata in info path.
I'm sorry?
But you're unable to use managed metadata in info path. But you're saying you can use enterprise keywords?
Enterprise keywords, that's right. Because the enterprise keywords is what's giving you that ability in that column to actually search and return back those results. On the enterprise, so when you're tagging, you're using that, right, out of SharePoint. So it's coming out of SharePoint, you're actually including that in your info path form. Great. Great. Have any more questions? Okay. Good question. Well, a custom list template, when I think about a custom list template, I think about when I want to use, maybe when I go into creating for customizations. Content types, ideally, is a way, really the best thing about a content type is associate metadata to an item. You can create, column, you can create choices here, you can create a lot more to associate and append to that document source or that list source. So that content type is more about how we can associate metadata to a document repository or a list item. So when you think about custom lists, I think about how we can probably do some customizations, right? Maybe calling, maybe some web service within that list definition. But the content type is ideally just a good way for you to use, content. You can associate metadata to a content source, document library list, for instance. Especially when you're talking about a list, right? When you create that content type, when you create a list, that basically is a content type when you say a new item, right? So that's kind of the difference there. You got any more questions? Sure.
Now I understand. So did you did create a content type?
A content type, yes.
And the content type was the school.
The content type was actually, I created it based on, I called it resource documents was the content type that I used, that I created. It was called resource.
Oh, okay, all right. And so once it went to, so when you created the content type of resource documents, that's how we would go to the folder with all the schools.
All the schools, exactly.
And then from there, I'm still getting that part, but that's where you were able to make sure that it got where it needed to go.
Sure.
To have that content type of resources for school.
Sure, exactly.
So if I had like a content type, because I work in training, if I had a content type for like policies versus procedures, or we call that standard operating procedures, we could say this content type is going to this folder, and then there might be like different areas for where the SOP might apply, but it would go to that folder based on the content type automatically.
Right. Organizing rules. The organizer rule based on the metadata on that content type, which will route to to that particular document library.
Hold on, all right, so you said, so set up the content rules.
Right, it's called an organizer rule. What's an organizer rule?
And that will make sure, that's what enables it to go to where.
Right, so wrap the document to the appropriate folder within the document library, based on the permissions of that document library and the metadata, the metadata associated to that content. It's going to be uploaded.
Okay, that this is, we could use that, like, honestly, I like what you're doing here, because like, you could use that, you just have it all sitting in a big folder, and we say, oh, no, let someone sit back. But if we can just make sure that it gets there automatically, we don't have to worry about organizing, that role is kind of tedious for people who are making the documents and then uploading, but they don't want to worry about that, but if we can just set it up so where, like, remove a few steps.
Sure.
That's what it sounds like this does.
Sure, absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. Very much.
Okay, so I have a document, Word document, brochure, I'll share with the group, whoever would be interested. What's the bridge between the document? Fill the content type with keyword column and understand column. I already have a document, so not fill it with that. I need a document.
Right. So here's the organizer rule. If the organizer rule, when you enable that organizer rule, you have the option to use a content type, to choose the content type. So when you create the content type, in the organizer rule, you have an option to say what content type, and it looks for that column in that content type. So you're able to choose the content type, choose the metadata, maybe the enterprise keywords, and maybe another actual column in that content type, in order to route the document to its particular location. So you can actually use a content type because the organizer rule really defines kind of where that document is going to go based on a content type.
And that'll happen when you're doing the initial upload.
When you're doing the initial upload of the document. And depending on what you can set as your default content type, you can tell the default content type. And based on that content type in your organizer rule, you set conditions to say, if you have conditions in that organizer rule that says if this equals or this pertains to or contains, then you have it, and it says then you would route this document to this particular location. Yes?
I'm sorry, is it content organizer, is it part, so it's integrated closely with enterprise keywords, services, or can it run just with any content type?
With any content type. It's not just associated with the managed metadata service.
Sorry, managed metadata.
You can enable the content organizer rule feature at a site collection level, and it doesn't have to be associated with a managed metadata service application.
So in cases, I know, I'm sorry, like in some workflow cases, I know in a designer workflow, you send, content or some in a particular location. So would it be, is it kind of so basically, I'm just trying to think, okay, in what case you would use what?
Right, sure.
Am I confused?
Sure. So ideally a workflow, you can achieve this as well. You can achieve this in a workflow as well. But a lot of times, I don't know if any of you have opened up SharePoint Designer. SharePoint Designer is one of those tools that you got to have some, and sometimes it's turned off in an organization. You're not able to use SharePoint Designer. So this allows you to create some sort of core process and routing of documents and content to a particular area. So I'm giving you a scenario where you can define and do some security trimming, and based on the document library, who should have permissions and who should have access to a document, a folder within a document library. You can say, well, I want to define this and have this only available to a certain group. So within my content organizer rule, I can define and say, based on conditions within a content type, I can create a content type, give it some columns, and within that content type, I can say, based on conditions, based on name, based on if I have an option that says, am I new? Yes. Then based on that, I'm able to route that document to new employees' document library, so to speak. Does that make sense? So you have the ability to not have to go and write a workflow or create SharePoint Designer to create a workflow to route a document around based on information that's associated, based on metadata that's associated within a content type that you're capturing as you upload that document.
Right. So is it a better approach to do the same? Because it seems like it's easier, like it's most straightforward approach to me to compare to designer. The approach
Right.
of using content type and putting it in certain location with certain permissions.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Because there's a little more involved when you're creating SharePoint designer type workflow. Definitely so. This is pretty straightforward, and it allows for you to create that type of routing without even having to open up SharePoint designer.
Cool. Thank you.
SharePoint designer.
Like I can't, like in my organization, I can't use content, I can't use SharePoint design.
Okay.
So, like, trying to create a workflow is terrible, it's excruciating.
Sure.
So this is like setting up the same thing as a workflow without necessarily needing to use SharePoint designer and still getting the same or similar result.
Absolutely.
We don't have the management over our team side as it is, so this we can actually do.
Great. Absolutely. Any more questions? I have actually some handouts in the back that will it shows the presentation, but it also if you missed anything, I have it there in the handouts for you. And you're able to contact me and ask information to reach out to me if you have any additional questions. Sorry about the technical difficulties, but ideally, we're able to use the managed metadata service, associate managed metadata and data associated to a content source of document and we're using a content organizer rule to route documents. So content organizer rule is a site collection feature that you can enable, and you can route documents based on conditions of a content type. And you can use enterprise keywords in content type to do some tagging, that enterprise keywords tagging. So when you create that managed metadata store, that managed metadata service application, you have that high-level term store. You create that term store, you can create term sets under that term store, and use that managed metadata to tag certain documents, and use a content organizer rule to route documents accordingly. Do security trimming on those folders within the document library, and route it to its appropriate location. That's the gist of what I was going to show you. And so, excuse me for that. I apologize for technical difficulties. But like I said, I have some handouts in the back, and if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. But I think we're up on our time. Maybe 15 minutes. So do we have any other questions? Thank you so much for attending. I hope you enjoyed your time at SharePoint Fest, and this was informative to you. So thank you so much for attending. Any questions? Yes, they are. Good question. Yes, they are. Great. Thank you all so much.